if I have a joke like this, if my functions depends like this on x1 as a function of x1. So you see, I will compute some elementary effects here and here. So here it will be -1, and here it will be +1. So I will have different elementary effects. And if I take the mean and I don't put the absolute value, if I take the mean of dx1, I will have 0 because it compensates between the negative values and the positive values. It compensates, so I have 0 and I have some effects. So I cannot detect that x1 has an effect. This is why we just take the absolute value in order to avoid this kind of things. Just a little detail, but it's useful to illustrate why we take this. We can also consider this measure, of course, the expectation, but we have to know that if it's 0, it doesn't mean that x1 has no effect. Okay? Okay. So at the end of the day, sorry. I think it's sufficient here. At the end of the day, after having computing mu star and sigma, okay, for each input, I give the figures that we will obtain with the Morris method. Imagine that we have 20 inputs. I call it here factors. This is the same, 20 factors. We have taken R to 10, so we have R times 20 plus 1 simulations, 210. Okay. We compute the mu star and the sigma for each input, and we obtain a figure like this. Mu star here, standard deviation here, and we immediately see some group, a group of variables which have very small mu star and sigma, a group of variables with large mu star and small sigma, and another group of variables with large mu star and large sigma. Of course, we have to compare the axis, the value on the axis, because it's comparable. It's some mean and some standard deviations. Okay, so here we can see finally negligible effects, linear effects, non-linear effects, and/or interaction effects. Okay, so we will use this during the practical sessions. These functions. It's very simple and can be useful if you have not a lot of budget. It can detect very quickly the non-influential effects. Okay. I have an example on my domain of a nuclear reactor, so I will not detail the example. I will just say that we have applied this on something with 43 inputs, 43 dimensions. Okay, and so with 20 repetitions. So you see, the number of repetitions is not so much. It's because we have a limited budget. So this is why we don't develop some theory on this kind of things. It's because it is devoted to the engineers who don't have a lot of budget. So we are far away from the asymptotical results. So with this kind of things, we need 860 runs. The computer code was just not so expensive, 1 minute. And so the total study needs 14 hours. And we have detected some particular variable, particular interesting variable for the physical phenomenon that we study in this case. Okay, so I will not detail these names. So now I want to pass to what we call the sampling-based approach, which first use very classical statistics. Is someone here who knows the parallel coordinate plot, which is a standard tool in data analysis? It's not so standard if you don't know. I will explain this because when you explore multidimensional data, with not so much of dimensions, up to 30, 40 maybe, it can be useful. This is this kind of plot. I will explain this. So these plots are classical. This is a scatter plot in order to understand the relation between output and input. And this is a complementary plot that we can use. So what I want to say is just that when you perform sensitivity analysis with an operational goal, first plot your data, of course. Don't compute some complex statistics before having visualizing your data. Maybe you are okay with me with this statement. But you have to know the tools that you use to visualize it. This is the standard, of course, the simplest tool to visualize data, the scatter plot. In this particular case, you have some output and some input. So you just look at the scatter plot between each input and the output. So for example, if you see a cloud like this with your sample, you have made a Monte Carlo design. So all the inputs vary at the same time, and finally you obtain some cloud. And this is a classical figure in a French book, maybe you have the same in your country, to explain how to detect some trend in this kind of potato. Same word than Tuesday. So you don't speak French, but maybe you can understand. So the goal here is to link A, B, C, D with 1, 2, 3, 4. So which cloud has a nonlinear correlation? Do you understand these different potatoes? This is just the representation of my ensemble of points. So which potato or which cloud has a nonlinear correlation for you? D. Okay, D. Nice. This is more complex, so I pass to the three. Which clouds has a linear correlations? So whether C. Which cloud presents an absence of link? Okay. And the last is which clouds has no link in mean, but a link in dispersion. So you see that the mean is the same, but the dispersions increase, so this is this kind of figure. Okay, this is very simple statistics. I have some example. Maybe I can just show on my little example with 5 inputs. This is the example of the river where I compute the overflow. So with this simple formula, just with a Monte Carlo sample of size 100, I can have very quickly the global trend. So the overflow increase when the flow rate increases. So of course you know this, but you verify. In practice, you don't have this formula. It's a complex computer code, so it will be useful to verify this simple thing. The overflow decreases when this coefficient increases. This coefficient is a kind of friction coefficient. This is the height of the dike. So the overflow decreases when the height of the dike increases. I have another model which is more complex. You see this formula on the same problem. It's a kind of evaluation of the cost in euro or in rupee of the flooding. And you see for example, for the Dyke H, I have a kind of compromise. In fact, I want to illustrate that you can have non-monotonic structure. When the height of the dike increase, the cost of flooding, of potential flooding decrease, but you have also the cost of building the dike. So at one time, the cost increase because the dike you have to build. Very simple example, but we can illustrate things like this. Okay, so with this kind of tools, unfortunately, we just analyze the first order relations between output and input. So this is a tool which is not well known, so it comes from the history of data analysis in the 70s, I think. So there is a strong French school in data analysis with, I have forgotten his name. I'm not data analyst, but okay. Anyway, so the idea is to place each input, each variable, you can use it for any kind of sample, each variable in an ordinate axis. Okay, so maybe you make a quantile transformation in order to have the same proportion of points. So after you have 1 point, you don't see, but we have 1 point on each axis, and you plot all the data with straight line linking each axis. Okay? So you see, behind I have a lot of lines because in this example I think it's a sample of 1,000 data, so I have 1,000 lines. So we see nothing. So the idea is just to illuminate some range, some interesting range. For sensitivity analysis, it's very useful because I can place my inputs here and my output here. I am interested by knowing which combinations of inputs lead to high value of outputs. So I just illuminate in red this, and I see automatically kind of density. After we can make, I think, more mathematical analysis on the density of points. But I just show the elementary tool. So you see, high value of these inputs, the red lines come from large value of these inputs, and small value of this one, and rather large value of this one. And here, it's rather totally dispersed. So this input has no influence for the high value of this output. This is what we can conclude. So it's I think it's a useful tool for exploratory data analysis. I have another example which is even nicer. So you see here I have 10 inputs, all this. We have plotted the histogram of the sample. It serves nothing, but we have plotted it just to see. And here I have my output, which has a particular structure because many of the values are here, but I have several values discontinuous from here, and again several values discontinuous here. So the physicists wanted to understand why we have this, because it is surprising for them. So and with the scatter plot, we didn't understand. So here is the scatter plot between the output where you see the main range here, and after here this corresponds to this, and here this corresponds to this point. And this is a particular input that I don't know because I see nothing. Maybe this is FGF. Okay? But by looking just at this thing, we cannot understand why this kind of thing happens. So this software, with this software, we have illuminated all that arrive here in blue and all that arrive here in red. And so now we understand that you have a strange thing which happens for the second variable, where the blue comes from high value of this variable, and the red comes from small value. The red here comes from the small value of this variable. After we see that there is also here, all these phenomena come from high value of this variable. And that's all. Okay? So the physicist understands that it comes from here and here, the problem. And I'm sorry, I have forgotten the rest of the story, the shoot. But what we can say is that it has allowed them to identify which physical model inside their big computer code cause this phenomenon. In fact, they have forgotten to put one geometry. This is the conclusion. So it has been shown its interest in this particular context of this computer code. Okay, so now if we want to be more quantitative, we use the standard tool first. We propose to perform a linear regression model on the data, and we can define what we call the standard regression coefficients, which are just the regression coefficients standardized by the ratio of the standard deviations of x and the standard deviation of the output. This is called standard regression coefficients. Okay, and so these coefficients are easily interpretable because they are between -1 and 1. After we can take the square. If we take the square, it is the classical decomposition of variance in the linear context. You see, we have these relations between the coefficient of determination, in the case of a linear model, and the standard regression coefficient taken square. Okay, so of course we can first use this. The beta is useful because it gives us the direction of variation of z with respect to x. If beta is negative, it means that z decreases when x increases, etc., etc. We can maybe do the simple thing like a linear correlation coefficients. And we can do the same with the rank. I remember that this is Professor Tuesday or Monday who has talked about the rank transformation when he talked about copula before he has introduced this thing with the rank transformations. You remember? I don't have slide on rank transformation, but what can I say is that if you made these rank transformations, do you remember what is these transformations? You take the vector of your values and you put the rank, you replace it by a new vector with the rank of each values inside this sample. We can do so if this is not satisfying because the relation between z and x and all the x is not linear, you can perform these rank transformations and you make the same thing by a rank linear regression. Okay? A rank linear regression which is valid if the relation between the output and the inputs is monotonic. So you have the same thing, and we call this the standard rank regression coefficients and the partial rank correlation coefficients that you can easily compute. So on my example, I have made these things, and I obtain so this is not the rank, this is just the standard regression coefficients. I obtain these values that I can interpret in terms of percentage of explanation of variance. I look at my R-square, my coefficient of determinations, in order to know if my linear model is valid. I verify, of course, if the residuals are well centered and no bias, etc. So just a linear regression analysis allows to solve the problem in this case because, in fact, the relation between the output and the inputs is linear. For my second output, if you remember, I have introduced these things. I have some non-linearity. So I cannot consider these sensitivity indices because the hypothesis is not valid. So I have just put the graph between the observation and the prediction by the linear model. So this is for the first output, it's good. This is for the second output. We see that there is a kind of bias. So I have to complexify my model because the linearity is not validated. Okay, so now I want to pass to more advanced method. I have an example, but it's not a funny example because it is an example on a nuclear accident. So if you like nuclear accident, I can explain, but if you don't like, I can pass. Okay, I pass. So more advanced method. So this scheme, I have said, preliminary step, you visualize your data. After you want quantitative indices, you can test very simple statistical tool, linear regression, rank regressions, and if all this is not sufficient, you pass to more complex indices, which is Sobol indices. So this is an introduction because I think Thierry will pass a lot of times on this kind of things. Sobol indices is also known as correlation ratio. In fact, there are some old definition of this, but it has been renewed by Sobol. It's the same as the Sobol of Sobol sequence passage. This is a Russian guy born in 1920. He has worked on Monte Carlo and quasi-Monte Carlo method in the 50s. And since the 80s, he has rediscovered, in fact, because all this comes from older statisticians like Hoeffding, Effron, Stein. He has rediscovered, but in the context of statistical analysis, the functional decomposition of variance that Thierry will be explaining. Any function G can be, any function L square G can be decomposed in a sum of elementary functions, in a sum of second order functions, etc., until the order P. This is the basic tool, and after, once we add an hypothesis of independence of the inputs, we can pass to a functional variance decomposition. I don't know. Yes, this is the functional decomposition of variance. So we call this functional ANOVA since Effron and Stein. So it means that the variance of the model, of the output, is decomposed in elementary variance plus second order variance plus P order variance. Okay? Where each variance is in fact the variance of conditional expectation. So variance of expectation of Z knowing Xi. This is for the first order. For the second order, Vig, this is the variance of the conditional expectation of Z knowing Xi and Xj, minus the first term, the first order term, etc., etc., until the P order term. Okay, so I repeat, the theory will be developed by Thierry. The strong independence to obtain this is the independence between the Xi. So if the Xi is dependent, are dependent, if you have some correlation structure, if you have some copula, it fails, and now you turn to a very urgent research subject, urgent but which dates for 20 years. I can, if you are interested, I can show you some recent papers. We can develop, if the X are dependent, we can develop the same thing by looking also by some covariance term, but it's not very satisfying. So recently, a researcher has proposed to take a result of game theory and to forget the functional ANOVA, and this result of game theory allows to allocate a score to each individual of a game. And so it turns this all the game theory result from 1951. Oh, sorry, I have Alzheimer. So the well-known and the guy who has won the Nobel Prize for his result on economy, Shapley. Shapley, yes. Okay, Lloyd Shapley. Okay, and so this from Lloyd Shapley. So he explained in a game you can find an equitable way to allocate the score of the global game to give some gains at each actors of the game. And recently, Arthur Owen, I talked about Owen yesterday, Arthur Owen has proposed to take this result from game theory and to put it in the scientific analysis problem. It seems that it solves the problem of dependence, but with some colleagues we try to explain, we try to understand how it solves this problem. So it's not sure. Okay. So this is what just an aparté. Now, once we have this, with this hypothesis, we can define the sensitivity index that we call the Sobol indices. Okay, so this is just the normalization of each term by the total variance. And so we can understand that each term, this is a contribution of, so Si is the contribution of Xi to the variance, and Sij is the contribution of the interaction of Xi and Xg in the variance. This is what is very interesting because we can analyze all the effects of the interaction. If we want to interpret rather visually these things, I can show you this curve. I just take my scatter plot, so I have four different inputs, and each time I have the same output, and I show you the potatoes. Excuse me. So in fact, when I look at this kind of trend is a conditional expectation. This is a conditional expectation. So sometimes a useful tool to plot this trend is to take the local polynomial techniques. This is what I use in R, just the function lowest. He puts this automatically. I'm happy. So here I have my local polynomial, and this is the expectation. And after the Sobol indices corresponds to the variance of these conditional expectations. So we can understand that here the conditional expectation is constant, so the variance is null. So the Sobol index is null. Here you see the range of variations is rather large, is between 3 and 10. So when you take the variance, you have high values of Sobol indices. And the same thing for the other. So finally, I say just by looking at the scatter plot, we can have the result. So one method useful to estimate first order Sobol index is just to compute a mean average or a local polynomial estimations or a spline. So any smoothing techniques, one-dimensional, so easy to use, no problem. You use any techniques, and after you just plug in your smoothing model to compute the variance with respect to the underlying input. Okay? It's easy for first order. However, after, if we want to compute the second order, the third order, the problem is that you are faced to the curse of dimensionality, and putting some non-parametric smoothers in a dimension larger than 3 or 4, for me, it seems to be difficult, but I don't know everything. I think it's a difficult subject. This is why, to estimate the other kind of index, we use Monte Carlo methods that Thierry will explain. Okay? I finished at 4. Yes. So now we have these Sobol indices. Is there any questions? No? Alors, the properties, the properties are very interesting because when you divided these relations by the variance, of course you have 1 at the left, and you obtain the Sobol indices here, because these Sobol indices correspond to the normalized thing. And so you have the sum of all the Sobol indices is 1. Okay. So what we can say is that the sum of all first order is always smaller than 1. Okay. When it's 1, it means that the model is additive. You don't have interaction, you don't have any interaction terms. So this is an additive model. So you can decompose J in a sum of a function of each variable. And finally, 1 minus this measure is a kind of measure of the degree of interactions between the variables. Okay? Okay, so we can say this. The difficulties in practice is to estimate this. I have explained a simple method to estimate first order, but most of the time we use a Monte Carlo method. But after, of course, you have too much indices. For example, with P equals to 4, I have 4 first order indices, 6 second order indices, 4 third order, and 1 fourth order. Okay, so I have 15. In the general case, I have 2 power p minus 1 indices to be estimated. So the cost becomes too much. And one simplification that these guys have found is to consider the total Sobol index for each input. So what is the total Sobol index? This is the sum of all the index of all the Sobol indices for the variable I. So the first order, the sum of all its second order with the other inputs. Here I have to put j different of I. The sum of all the third order, here I have to put I different of j smaller than k. Okay. Okay, we don't see anything. Okay. So this is the definition of the total. And we have this useful things, which is that finally this total Sobol index is 1 minus the Sobol index tilde I, which means the Sobol index of all the combination where I is absent. Is it clear what I say? No? More or less. So y minus all that it remains. Okay. Once we know this, this guy has found an algorithm to compute at the same time the first order and the total. Because in fact we need the same Monte Carlo simulations. Yeah, they have shown this. Okay, so thanks to this, we can compute Si and S tilde I with the same simulations. And so in practice, we simulate Si and STI as the total Sobol index. So the results, come back to my float model example. For my first output and my second output, which is more complex. So in my first output, I have shown that I have linear relation. So it's not useful to compute Sobol indices because I have my standard regression coefficients, which are the same meanings. The Sobol indices is just a generalization of the standard regression coefficient. But I want to show this. So X each thing is one different input. The circle is the first order Sobol index. The triangle is the total Sobol index. So of course, with this linear model, there is no interaction term. So the first order is equal to the total order for all the input. And so you see that the Sobol index are comprised between 0 and 1. We can interpret them in terms of percentage of contribution in the variance. So the first one, you see, around 40%. For this one, HD, around 30% of contributions. You can verify that the sum of the first order is equal to 1. Approximately. Okay? Alors, the little bar I have added is just a confidence interval that I have computed with some bootstrap techniques. Okay, for the cost, you see a difference between the first order and the total. And so this is the interaction effect. I don't know with which variable. If I just look at this, I know that Q, the flow rate, interact with some other inputs. There is an interaction. But I don't know with which input. But if I look at all the things, so I see that here the Sobol indices are 0. Here the first order and the total is quasi the same. Here also, or maybe a small increase. And here I have something. So now I can easily interpret this and conclude that these two inputs has an interaction effect. Okay? Okay, so finally, my global scheme of sensitivity analysis. I have my Sobol indices. The question is how to estimate this because of my constraint, maybe of CPU time cost of computing my model. So if this computing time is negligible, you can use the Monte Carlo techniques. The number of runs which are required are, this is an empirical point of view based on a lot of experiments, 1,000 times the dimensions. So it's linear in the dimension, the dependence. Okay? If I use my smoothing technique, it's independent of the dimension because I just take the sample, but with my smoothing technique, I just compute the first order. I don't compute the total. So if I use Monte Carlo methods, so it means, but Thierry will explain this, it means that you need to make some manipulation of matrix in order to compute the variance of conditional expectations. This is the game. If the cost is too high to apply this, you can turn your problem with the same numerical scale, the same algorithm, but instead of taking a Monte Carlo sample, you can reduce the cost by taking a quasi-Monte Carlo sample, as I have explained yesterday. Okay? Or there are other techniques which also allow to reduce the variance. And finally, if the cost is too high to reach such a budget, if you have 10 inputs and you can only run 100 times your model, you can only perform 100 points. So we propose to use the meta-model technique that I have explained yesterday. So first you create your sample with a nice space filling design. You fit your Gaussian process model, or other thing if you want. And after, with this model, you can apply big Monte Carlo techniques because the goal of this model is that it takes a very small amount of time to print some prediction. Yesterday, I have shown, I don't remember how many, but 1,000 or 10,000 predictions take only 1 second on my computer. Okay. 10 minutes after I make a little demonstrations. But first, excuse me, I just look at why I can present. Maybe I can show you this. Issues in all these topics. I distinguish three kinds of issues. The first is the issues related to the numerical model G. The second is the issues related to the inputs, and the third to the outputs. Okay, so I succeeded to distinguish between all these things. So, in the case of a complex model, what to do when I want to make a global scientific analysis? Complex first. What means complex? Complex means it's not linear. So with some interactions, with some discontinuity maybe, with something complex inside my model. So in this context, what I have just introduced are very useful. A lot of people use this kind of thing. But these things are based on decomposition of variance. So maybe you want to study something else, because the variance is just an elementary measure of dispersion of uncertainty. And maybe you may want to study difference on density, on the tail density, on the tail distributions. So all a class of techniques have been developed and are called the moment-independent measures. And I think Thierry Klein will explain one particular moment-independence measure based on Kramer matrix, Kramer von Mises matrix, or the Conversion of, I don't remember. So he will extend this case to some other metrics of to compare difference of distributions. So when G is costly, so I have explained that we can use some meta model to compute this or this, as you want. After, for the model inputs, you see when P is large. So when P is large, of course, you see that all these computations, even the meta model, require as a dependence in P, in fact, the cost. So when P is large, for example, in my company, I have some examples with 150 inputs, so I cannot compute several indices, of course. But even some fitting a meta model is very complex in such dimension. So what we do, first we do the screening step that I have explained just with the Moritz method. We perform a screening and we reduce the dimensions to rather small dimensions, 10, 15. When the inputs are dependent, so I have talked about the Shapley indices. If you are in this case, I can give you the papers. And after, there is another subject which is important in practice. This is the epistemic uncertainty that Professor
It's been Mukherjee.
Thank you, Mukherjee. I don't have to forget his name. I'm totally lost, in fact. He has talked about the epistemic uncertainty. Epistemic uncertainty can be considered sometimes as a second level of uncertainty. You have uncertainty on your uncertainty. Yes, after you have uncertainty on your uncertainty of your uncertainty, etc., etc. We stop at the second level. So, all what we do in uncertainty propagation and sensitivity analysis are based on some probability density functions. But in the real world, we are not sure about these probability density functions. We have some uncertainty. And for example, in my industry, in the nuclear industry, of course, we put some distribution functions on some parameters, but in fact, we don't know a lot of things. So we have to take care about this second level of uncertainty. And I call this robustness analysis. We have developed some indices on this thing. I can just show because I have five minutes. Yes, it's interesting. It's a work with Fabrice Gambois, who is one of the main organizers of this summer school. It's his idea. It's his idea. So I give to Cesar the work, the idea is to perturb the PDF by a statistics, okay, with a certain perturbations. So how we perturb it? So the main technical ingredient is that we perturb the PDF following the Kullback-Leibler divergence. So we define a certain delta, and we want to perturb, for example, the mean of a Gaussian. We perturb this mean, and we rebuild the perturbed distributions based on this thing. So when the initial distribution is Gaussian, it's very nice because the perturbations is a Gaussian. So just, you have an initial PDF. You say that my mean is perturbed by delta, and so the new PDF is this. Okay? So, but it only works with Gaussians. In the general case, for example, for uniform, if you have a uniform distributions, I fix my support, mean and max, and I say, oh, now I'm not sure about my mean. So I move my mean of delta. So it becomes something like this. Okay? So it's no more uniform distribution. So this is one of the main ingredients, is to define a new distribution, mu I delta. Okay? This, okay? Okay. I explain. So I'm not sure about my initial PDF, and in this case, I want to compute the probability of failure. So P, the probability that my output is larger than a critical threshold. So P is my initial probability. I have computed it with a Monte Carlo scheme, for example. And now, what I need is to compute the perturbed probability, the probability knowing that one of the input is not good, has been perturbed. And you see here a very simple formula that we call reverse importance sampling. The importance sampling is when you move these things to compute the probability, and after you come back to the initial distributions. And this is just, I use the same sample that I have used to compute P in order to compute Pi delta. So the probability when I have perturbed by delta the input xi, and I just have to put a ratio here between the perturbed density and the initial density. Okay, and so it's very easy to compute this. And so I compute my perturbed probability. Finally, we have developed this sensitivity index, which measures the deviations of the probability when I have perturbed by a factor delta. So you can look, when the probability, the new probability is larger, we take this. When the new probability is smaller, we take this, in order to have something centered. So when this is equal to this, we have 0. When this is larger than this, we have a positive value. And when this is larger than this, we have a negative value. So the result of this kind of techniques is this. You have a curve for each input, a curve of sensitivity indices, because in APSIS we put the delta. So we move progressively the delta at left and at right. So here you have 0. And so we see which input cause the main increase of the probability. So you see the very different kind of sensitivity analysis. And now I prefer to call this robustness analysis. And it's very useful in my engineering studies. So I think I can talk 1 hour more, but I will stop. And first, before I will show the package that we will use, because I want to explain something, and it's better if everybody are here. if you want to use this package, it will be useful to know something. So the package that we will use just after in the practical session is called sensitivity. Okay? So you have, it is developed since 2006. It has been developed by a student, just a very good student. And after, I have added many functions. So you see all the, first I can look what is this package. Method and function for global sensitivity analysis. So it implements all this kind of linear regression coefficients, some screening techniques that I haven't explained, the Morris methods that we will use, some technique based on derivative analysis that we will look at this method after, and all the technique about Sobol indices. So you see, you have 20 formula to compute this kind of thing when the inputs are independent. So you have the Sobol scheme, the Saltelli scheme, the Mount-Scotian-Sco scheme, the Johnson-Sobol scheme, the Martinez scheme, the Janon-Monod scheme, the Marat scheme, etc., etc. What can I say is that I have some preferred, but I don't want to say. When the inputs are dependent, you have the Shapley effects that I have explained, etc., etc. I want just now to illustrate the usage of the Morris function. Okay, so, excuse me. Okay. So, so Morris implements the Morris method. Okay. So we will use this like this. So here you have Morris, the functions. Anyway, model your model. I will explain in which case we can put null, and it's very interesting. Factors is the number of factors. R is the number of replica that you do on your one at a time. Design is other options, etc., etc. So we will apply. I want to show you an application of these functions on the Morris, method on the Morris function. Yeah. Because Morris has its own functions, so it's a kind of consecration. Do you see the function? Yeah. Well, it's a kind of combination, a complex combination of this kind of function, xi over xi plus 0.1. So it's not extremely nonlinear, but there are some high-order interactions because of this term. You have some interaction of order 2, of order 3, and order 4 in this kind of functions. And all the x are taken inside 0, 1. So it's just to see these functions. Okay, so if I want to use Morris, excuse me. So you see what? Do you see what I do? Maybe not. I can see it on the other web page. Yes, here. So the model is the name of the functions, Morris.fun. Factors equal 20, there are 20. I make 4 replica, and the design is a loop where I define that I want to make some one-at-a-time increment because we can complexify it. the number of levels, this is the number of subdivision. And the grid table is another detail that I will explain later. What I want to explain is a thing very useful with this package is that in the case of you study a model which is not coded in R, this can be your case. If your program is a C program or a Fortran program that runs in other machine, and you want to apply this function, so it can be complex because all is integrated in this function. This function creates the design for you, run the function for you, and analyze the output for you, and give you the plot. All is done. So in the case, if you want to decompose the job, you can do the following thing. You say, instead of Maurice.fun, you say just model equal null. It says to the function that you don't run the model, you just compute the design. So the result of the object is x, and if you want to take the design, you look at x, you see that there is an attribute which is called design, so $design is the design you have to run. Excuse me, no $design. $x, excuse me. Yes, this is the matrix of your design. So now you can export this in your system. You compute your computer code on each line of this design. So you see I have 20 inputs and I have 84 lines. You recover, so you compute, you run your simulation model on these lines, and you recover in a vector. In a vector, you recover your output. So here, I am in R, so this is simple. I just say Maurice.fun is the name of the function. So I have my output. Okay? And now there is the tell mechanism that I just wanted to explain because it's very powerful. Tell mechanism says me tell me what happened. So tell. Do you see what I write? I have written tell of my object Maurice sensitivity analysis x, and y is the vector of output. Okay, and so I have update the object sensitivity analysis, and now I have the result of the Maurice that I can plot off. So I just wanted to explain this because I think it's easier to explain in this place than in the other place. So thank you. So now you can have the pause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.